Hello, I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I know that might not be what you expected to hear after clicking on this video's title on thumbnail, but it's true. This tabletop RPG has had such a positive impact in my life, and I'm so glad I sat down to play my first game back in high school. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is actually my favorite tabletop game, and I hope that shows through this channel. That being said, I do not think it's a perfect game, and I don't want to fall into the stereotype player who says Pathfinder fixes this every time someone mentions a flaw in their favorite system. So today, I'm going to cover 5 things that I do not like about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Notice I said I don't like, not I hate. Hate's a strong word that I usually only say for clickbait thumbnails and titles. In fact, for some of these points, I completely understand why Paizo made the choices that they did, even if I don't personally agree. That's why, for each topic, I'm going to explain my issues with the system, as well as giving the strongest stillman I can muster for why these design decisions exist in the first place. So we're Flame Wars, and without further ado, let's get started. Alright, let's start small, shall we? One of the biggest strengths of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is its tight math, which makes the counter design a breeze. No more preparing epic bosses only for your party to steamroll it, or accidentally triggering TPKs from a random group of wolves that just happen to have pack tactics. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, if you throw a level 6 creature at a level 6 party, you can pretty much count on it being a moderate threat, and that consistency is great. But my problem with the system is twofold. First, proficiency scaling really narrows down the level range of monsters that you can use. In 5e, bounded accuracy means even low level enemies can occasionally have an impact on a high level battlefield. A CR 1/4 goblin in D&D 5e has a plus 4 to hit, meaning you can still tag a CR 17 adult red dragon with its AC of 19 on a lucky roll. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, that same goblin has a plus 7 to hit, but the dragon has an AC of 37, meaning only a natural 20 lands, and even then, it barely scratches the enemy. Now, you may think that this is realistic, or it's a prime example of the heroic fantasy that Paizo is going for, and I would actually probably agree with you, but it does have some side effects. For starters, as a GM, if I'm flipping through the bestiary for something to use against my players, anything more than 3 or 4 levels above or below the party's level is basically unusable. Sure, Paizo gives us monster crafting rules that we can use to scale a creature up or down, and we can use troops and swarms to represent large number of weaker foes, but that takes prep, and you can't just improvise it on the fly mid-session without drastically slowing things down. So if your PCs throw a curveball at you and want to bring NPC allies like Bob and the Goblin into their Dragon's Lair at a moment's notice, the GM is kind of at a loss for options unless they want to host an unprompted barbecue. Second, and this is the bigger issue for me, Paizo's proficiency scaling makes enemy weaknesses feel drastically less meaningful. Imagine you're playing the archetypal frail old wizard at level 20. You come home after defeating the Demon King, and a farmhand from your hometown jokingly challenges you to an arm wrestling contest. Who should win this fight? If you ask me, the farmhand who spends his life working in the fields should at least stand a chance against the wizard who hasn't picked up a dumbbell in, well, ever. But under Pathfinder 2e's rules, the level 20 wizard, more likely than not, wins this easily. But under Pathfinder 2e's rules, even with no strength boostments, if you happen to have your athletics at trained, you have a plus 22 to athletics modifier. The farmhand has a plus 5. It's not close. And if the wizard picked up untrained improvisation, even if you didn't take training in athletics, it wouldn't matter. You'd still outclass the farmer. This is because Pathfinder 2e assumes that characters and monsters at the same level all live in this narrow proficiency range. In 1st edition, monsters had massive stat swings. The This guy, for example, had a plus 40 fortitude save, but only a 12-point reflex save. That's an 18-point difference. Players can exploit that. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the same boss monster has a plus 44 fortitude save and a plus 40 reflex save. That gap shrinks to about 4 points, making weaknesses feel more like a flavor than an actual vulnerability. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to go back to the way that 1st Edition ran things, where you could cheese fights with any auto-win strategy, and just if you hit the lowest save, you automatically won. But I do wish Pathfinder 2e struck to some kind of middle ground, where monsters had real weaknesses, without weaknesses boiling down to just a 20% accuracy boost. Right now, the proficiency scaling feels a little bit too airtight for my taste. I don't think this is very much of a hot take, so I'm not going to spend too much time leading into it. Skill and general feats are a really cool idea with some pretty lackluster execution. The concept is great. You get your own little feat list, you get minor flavorful benefits without sacrificing your class progression. This is why I love skill feats like Fascinating Performance. Sure, the Fascinated condition isn't the strongest, and it's tough to use this in combat, but that's fine. Skill feats aren't supposed to compete with class feats, which are almost always more powerful and more combat oriented. And I like that you can take something like Seasoned to improve your cooking and still be just as effective as a barbarian or alchemist. The problem is that these fun, flavorful feats still have to compete with strong feats like Battle Medicine or Kip Up, which are incredibly strong in combat, sometimes just as useful as a class feat. And then there are feats that feel like they should just be part of the skill as default. Confabulator is a great skill feat. It lets you recover from failed deception checks so that you're not locked out of lying on an unlucky roll. That feels great and makes a noticeable difference when it comes up. Meanwhile, Charming Liar lets you make an impression when you lie. If I'm lying to someone, I already care what they think about me, and I would argue should always be trying to make an impression. Then you have feats like Quick Coercion, which turn conversations into round by round combat mechanics instead of letting them flow naturally, which really slows things down. Now, if you're a character with a lot of skills, this isn't a huge deal. Just skip the feats you don't like. But for characters with fewer skills, it's easy to run out of good options. I had a player running an adventure sprite who dumped a ton of skill increases into stealth and performance. Once the useful crafting feats didn't apply, since our campaign didn't really have a lot of downtime, that's my fault actually, but he ran out of stealth feats worth taking. At one point, he just stopped picking skill feats altogether, because in his words, none of them would ever really matter. He couldn't think of a situation where they would apply. That same player is in my current game with a psychic. We leveled up and he got a skill feat. He told me, just pick something random and put it in Foundry. It doesn't really matter. Until I pointed him towards the medicine and occultism feats that he realized, oh wait, there are actually good skill feats. And if you look at the general feats, yikes. Once you've picked up Toughness, Fleet, and Incredible Initiative, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. I joke that Toughness is our favorite feat in the game for a lot of builds, but honestly, I don't like it. It's just to me a bland number bump, and yet it ends up on most of our builds because when we're making 2 builds a week, it's easier than digging through the source material to justify taking something like Breath Control, which will almost never come up in your home game. And this is what frustrates me. It would be easy for Paizo to fix this. Just release more feats. Even if they're still a mixed bag, then at least there's something for everyone. People who like to roleplay and put that most have a lot of flavorful feats, while people who are a little bit more combat oriented and like to min-max a little bit have things like Kip Up. Ideally, at the very least, every skill should have some kind of powerful capstone feat, like Legendary Thief, that unlocks a wild, high fantasy ability that feels worth the journey. Right now, too many skills and general feats feel either underwhelming or more like taxes instead of fun options to do what you want. Problem number 3 is less about the game itself and more about Paizo's design philosophy. I feel like Paizo often designs wide instead of tall. They come up with the most creative mechanics that I've ever seen, but sometimes it feels like they toss an idea into a rulebook, then move on to the next shiny thing without fully fleshing it out. Take gadgets. Inventors got a whole lot of feats around them in Guns and Gears. Gadgets are these neat little consumable inventions that add variety and keep adventures from feeling like one-trick ponies. The book gave us 20 unique gadgets, which is a great start. But since then, we've only gotten 3 more in the Grand Bazaar and 9 more unique items in rival academies. That's a long wait for something that was clearly designed to be a pretty decent part of the class. Or look at Clerics. They launched with 2 doctrines back in the core release, and we didn't get a third one until 2025. And again, I don't want to sound greedy. Paizo doesn't owe me endless amounts of content for my favorite mechanics. Having fewer options can even push GMs to homebrew a little, which is always a great thing. But it's frustrating when you can tell Paizo has more ideas and we haven't seen them. The tattoo system is the clearest example. Secrets of Magic came out in 2021 and introduced magical tattoos, along with the tattoo artist skill feat. It lets you learn 4 tattoo formulas of level 2 or lower. The problem? The lowest level tattoo in that book was level 3. The feat was literally unusable on release. We had to wait until Treasure Vault 2 years later for Paizo to add more tattoos and fix the feat. Meanwhile, Paizo's pumping out classes at a very steady pace, at least once a year, which, I'm not complaining, that is awesome. Especially when you compare it to Wizards of the Coast, who almost never releases another class. But where Wizards goes deep by adding more and more subclasses to existing classes, Paizo goes wide, adding entirely new classes, new spells, new item systems. But the catch is that you have to wait years for those systems to get real support. And with many classes piling up, my worry is that some of those will start to fall through the cracks. So, I don't like how multiclassing works in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In 1st edition and Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, multiclassing meant that when you leveled up, you could take a level in your class or a level in a new class. The upside is you got all the juicy level 1 features right away, but the downside was a lot of classes were really heavily front loaded, so everyone dipped a level or two into fighter, barbarian, or monk for easy power, which led to some ridiculous builds, like a warlock, paladin, sorcerer, chimera that looked cool on paper, but could totally break the balance of the game. 2nd edition fixed this by making multiclassing work through an archetype feats instead of class levels. The big advantage here is that you level up, you don't give up your main progression. So if you're a wizard and you blow every single class feat you have on barbarian feats, you still end up with 10th level spells at the end, and even legendary spellcasting. Sure, you can't use those spells while raging, so the synergy's a little out of whack, but the point is, you don't lose all your identity because you dipped a few levels. And I really like this system for mixing dramatically different classes. Problem comes when you try to make a build as a 50-50 split, rather than one class having a clear and primary advantage. Let's compare fighters in 5th edition versus fighters in Pathfinder 2nd edition. In 5th edition, dipping 3 levels into fighters means that you got a fighting style, second wind, action surge, and even your subclass. That's almost the entire fighter's package, while still leaving you with 17 levels for your main class. If you're a caster, you can still get 9th level spells. Now, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, fighter multiclass looks a lot less exciting. The first feat gives you martial weapon proficiency, which most martial classes will already have, and casters still won't be proficient enough to use those weapons properly, especially if they use their stat investment elsewhere. You don't get fighter's signature accuracy bump, you don't get an extra class feats, and you don't get their signature reaction out of the gate. In fact, a lot of multi-class archetypes don't give you the class's core features at all, and if they do, they're a watered down version so you have to take much later. Take Monk for example. At level 1, monks get flurry of blows, letting them make 2 strikes with 1 action, usable every round. As a multi-class, you get to spend 2 feats on it, wait until level 10, and even then you can only use it once every 1d4 rounds. Or Guardian, which lets you defend allies with intercept strike at level 1. As a multi-class, you'd have to burn 2 feats and wait until level 6, and the ability becomes usable once per 10 minutes. That's not niche protection, that's just making it feel bad in my opinion. And I get it. Paizo really wants to value niche protection. They don't want everyone dipping into fighter and stealing its identity, and I agree with that. Not every class feature should be equally accessible to all classes. But if you're going to lock iconic features behind higher level feats, at least let them work without severe handicaps. Honestly, I like the half level rule that Paizo has with most of the classes. It's a good balance. If you're level 16 Barbarian and you want to grab a level 8 Champion feat, that feels fair. It keeps your main classes special while still letting players mix and match for creativity. Right now, though, multiclassing feels a little bit too restrictive in my opinion. Alright, problem number 5. And this is probably my spiciest take. Pathfinder 2nd Edition just isn't mad enough. For anyone unfamiliar, MAD stands for Multiple Ability Dependent. That means your class needs to invest in several different stats to function properly. A classic example for this is Pathfinder 1st Edition's Monk. They need Strength for damage, Dexterity for AC, Constitution to not immediately fold in combat, and Wisdom for their key abilities. That's 4 stats fighting for your attention all at once. A nightmare if you're trying to optimize. But, personally, I kind of like it. See, most people's complaint with MAD is that you can't build them perfectly. You always feel a little bit behind compared to someone who's focusing on just one stat. But for me, that's the fun part. It forces trade-offs. Do I bump strength so I can hit harder, dexterity so that I don't get hit at all, or do I lean into wisdom for key powers, knowing that I'll be a little bit squishier? The tension makes every level up feel like a meaningful decision, instead of just, well, I guess I'll put another boost into the obvious stat. Pathfinder 2nd Edition leans almost entirely the other way. Most classes are SAD or single ability dependent. Barbarians only really need strength. Sorcerer and bards stack charisma. Wizards dump everything into intelligence. Sure, Constitution is always nice, but most of the time you've picked your primary stat, and the rest barely matter. This makes characters feel more streamlined and balanced, which is good for new players and game balance, but it also means there's a little bit less spice, so you don't get many moments where you think, man, if I had one more point of wisdom, this would all just click in a much better way. Even when a class might look mad on paper, Pathfinder 2e usually finds a way to smooth it out. Monks, for example, still feel like they should spread multiple stats, but the system makes them work fine if you pump dexterity over everything else. Champions could have leaned hard into strength, charisma, and constitution, but most builds can ignore 2 out of 3 of those and still function perfectly well. I'm not saying that every class should be brutally mad like the old monk, but I think the game would really benefit from a few classes that force us to spread our stats thin. Something where you're consistently balancing priorities, making compromises, and feeling those trade offs. It adds texture and variety, and honestly, it makes the moments where suboptimal builds shine feel even more rewarding. So, yeah, Pathfinder 2e is an amazing system, but to me, it plays things a little too safe sometimes, and I wish it leaned more into the madness just a little bit. And that's my list of the 5 biggest problems that I have with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think it's a fantastic system, and honestly, one of the best ATRPGs in the market right now. But even the best games have room for improvement, and I think these are the spots where I think Paizo could have pushed things just a little further. What about you? Do you agree with my list, or do you think I'm completely off base? Drop your own Pathfinder 2e hot takes down in the comments. I'd love to see what issues you have with the system, or where you think I'm wrong. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so that you don't miss our next deep dive into Pathfinder or our weekly build guides. Till next time, keep rolling high, and we'll catch you in the next one.